All right, team. For those of you that have joined us, thank you for joining. I know we're going to have others join later, but I'm going to go ahead and kick us off in the interest of time because we have a very special panel tonight filled with people that have very busy schedules. I'm sure they've got some to do at like 10:01 or so. So I'll kick us off. My name is John Tanner. I work for Freddie Mac. I am the lead of the Agile Center of Excellence there, but I am not the star of the show. We have some very big names. We've got Dean from Scaled Agile. We got Mike from LeadingAgile. We got Jeff from Excella. We got Sanjeev from LitheSpeed. And we got Dominica from Tasktop, which I got wrong when I emailed her earlier, and I apologize for that. But listen, I read your book. It's my fault. It's not yours. So I want to kick us off with a question for the group. And I do want to encourage everyone participating. If you can add your questions to the chat, it would be amazing. I'm going to ask a few questions, and then I would like us to go full on to the audience. I would love if you guys out there, panelists, if you could, chat with each other, ask each other questions, because it's a very important time we're in. So my first question is, most people know you guys as big names in industry. You're authors, you're leaders, you are people that we think of when we think of Agile right now. But each of you are either involved with a small business or leading a small business. And that is a big part of our world right now. And a lot of people are watching CNN trying to figure out how is that impacting us. So I would like to start with Jeff, if you could answer, how is this affecting you? And then if the rest of you guys could just tell us, how is the small business dealing with the current world landscape?
Yeah. So thanks for being here, John. This is fun. Small businesses, how it's affecting us. This is one of the most disruptive times I think I can imagine. I can remember my entire career. I was thinking about this just earlier today. Whatever the status quo was before this happened, like it's gone. There is no normal anymore, and everybody is trying to readjust and flex and adapt to whatever the changes of the day are. As far as our business is concerned, we were probably blessed more so than many. A lot of our teams were already used to operating remotely, at least in part. We had, to some degree, a remote workforce, so we're used to collaborating in a distributed fashion. Our clients, to one degree or another, were the same way. So we had the benefit of at least having some experience with that leading up to this. But then everybody just went to 100% immediately, overnight almost, it felt like. And that threw a lot of stuff into disruption. The one thing that I am...
What do you mean by 100%, Jeff? 100% what?
Oh, I mean, offices have been shut down. Literally doors have been locked. You are not allowed back into the office. Excella has done that with our headquarters.
So 100% remote.
100% remote, yeah. Yeah, there's no going back into the office anymore. There's no physical co-location of any kind anymore. And then the one thing that has been, I think, really pleasantly surprising is just the humanity that's been displayed in all of this, both by our clients, by our employees, just by people that we deal with. Everybody has been really, really human. And there's a great quote from an email that I got today from one of our employees. To have empathy and patience and compassion for each other. He's seeing that. I think we're seeing that regardless of the domain on your email address or the business card that you're carrying. I think everybody is showing that a lot.
So what was fascinating to me is when Freddie Mac switched over, we switched over, and then everybody went home and it worked. It just kind of worked. That was crazy, right? We've had a view in Agile that we have to be in person, we have to be co-located, we have to be a team on the ground sitting next to each other. Freddie Mac switched over and it's still working. So I'd like to ask, I'd actually toss up something to Dean. Dean, you've been doing a lot with your company to send out email blast videos, like how do you take scale remote? And that's fascinating to me. Can you speak to that for a second?
Yeah, well, one of the interesting things about scale is it is distributed. So we're finding, basically the truth under what we've always admitted, which is co-location is great. But even my framework team is not co-located. We're in 2 countries and 4 time zones. So we're able to continue our work just as normal. And the company was able to pivot pretty quickly because we are an international company, and we have our, biweekly system demos and PI planning, and not everybody's always there. So operationally, it's been a pretty easy adjustment for us. Now, I think we all thought we'd get home and we'd have more time on our hands. And the reality is, I don't know about you, but my day is as jammed as ever. Now, the business impact, however, is serious. And the reason is that we're a partner-based company, and our partners do face-to-face training. That's the basic business model. So the business model came under immediate attack. Not as bad as a friend of mine who's in private equity, and they've just funded a business that's in the events management business. Their revenue went to 0. So we've had an impact, but our team was pretty adept and pretty agile because we know how to, we have organizational agility. So we remote enabled all of our courses within about 2 weeks. That was something we were doing anyway, but it was a huge accelerator. So last week, I think there were 70 remote courses delivered. I didn't watch, but our product management team watched the NPS score with bated breath. And guess what? Absolutely no change on the NPS score. I don't know what that means. Maybe they didn't learn anything, but they still thought it was a fun class. But that's been pretty interesting. So we have to suffer through the business impact of that. We're a strong company, and we'll be fine compared to sending all your employees home for a retail store or something like that.
Yeah.
So we're kind of lucky ones here. Speak about empathy. I think our empathy needs to extend to those who don't have big incomes and aren't involved in companies that are strong enough to survive. So I would say operating wise, it's minimal impact. Business wise, it's a huge impact, and we have to pivot and address that. For us, primarily with remote training.
And actually, that's a question I had for Mike. I know, Mike, you've been a level head throughout this whole thing. You've been very pragmatic as an Agilist about this whole thing. You're still thinking through it, I get it, but what is your thought on the impact of business, society? Like, what's going on, man?
I think it's the first time I've ever been accused of having a level head, John. So, you're on record. I might quote you from here on out. I think it's kind of interesting. I mean, there's kind of 2 aspects of it. There's the tactical, how do we engage over distance? And then there's the other half of the question, which is, what is the impact to business? Engaging over distance is interesting, right? And as everybody else was talking, I was thinking about back in the days when Alistair was talking about osmotic communication. And it's not that we can't communicate over distance and we can't collaborate over distance. It's just that information isn't in the ether over distance. And so we have a bunch of clients that have been great. All our teams are working remote. We're coaching remote. Our models support remote. We're training remote. We're doing everything remote. But you can't hear information in the air remote. You can't walk down to somebody's office and talk to them. You can't take them out to lunch, right? And so candidly, we're navigating that, right? As a company that's largely built upon relationships and having strong relationships with the companies we're supporting, we're being super cognizant of how to maintain that information flow in the absence of physical presence. And then as far as the company goes, we're fairly strong as well. Cash reserves, lines of credit, good receivables, big companies that pay, right, kind of a thing. So we're not worried about losing revenue in the short run, and we're not worried about laying people off in the short run either. If it goes on too long, then it's a funny dicey game as to how bad does it get, right? So, but I think the interesting challenge that we have to respond to that's maybe relevant here is the idea of volatility and uncertainty. I imagine Dean at some point could pretty much bet that a certain amount of people are going to come to a certain amount of classes, and there'd be a certain level of revenue continuity and things like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the question is when your revenue could potentially go up and down, or is subject to sudden drops. It's like, how do you create safety in that flow, right? And it's different for every company, but I mean, that's the biggest thing. So like when I think John's referencing some of the conversations that I start on Facebook and really just trying to encourage people to be smart, but be calm, right? Let's not panic yet. Let's figure out how to go into it and solve it. And I think in Agile, we have to think the same way, but it's like we're dealing with, I say an enemy, but it's like, it's the virus, but it's also our collective reaction to the virus. And so I think on some level, we have to you just kind of breathe, right? And figure out how to like systematically move through. But as a business, we have to be able to be resilient to that volatility.
Yeah, so that leads me kind of, Sanjeev. So your company is working on how do you take in-person trainings and make them remote? I know everybody on this panel is doing the same exact thing.
Yeah.
But can you talk a bit about, like, so Mike was talking about, you can look at a future and you can see your forecast revenue and everything else. So you have to adapt. How are you adapting?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and definitely to echo everything that's been said to so far. And also, I'm looking at the questions that are coming in. There's a specific question on training and how do you ensure the same level of quality for remote versus in-person training. So let me start with the flip answer over there. How are we adapting? So like many of the others on this panel, or like all others on this panel, we certainly were looking at the reports of, you know, the virus spreading in China, and then moving to Italy, and then Italy was sort of the canary in the coal mine. When things started happening there, we knew we had to prepare for it and start to think differently, because that disruption was coming. It was inevitable at that point, right? So at that point, you know, there's a question of how do you deal with this whole chaos? And of course, many of us come from this background of complex adaptive systems. We're many folks out in the industry and on the call are probably familiar with Dave Snowden's work, the Kinevin framework, and you're moving from complex into a chaotic situation, right? And then the question is, what do you do as a leader? As a leader, as a company, you know, as a company, and each one of us are leaders in the industry, we have to be able to figure out what exactly to do in that system of chaos. And that's actually where we are right now, right? Maybe things are starting to stabilize. Maybe we're seeing a little bit of sort of intermediate stability, but there's definitely volatility and chaos. So the first thing you have to do is stanch the flow, right? So we stanch the flow, figure out, well, let's look at, like Mike, look at the lines of credit, look at the expenses, start to do some expense projection, start to do some revenue projection. And then even as you're doing that, the first thing you do is to look at your people, right? So for us, it's always has been and is now and always will be a people first attitude. Right? So it's the ethos around which our company was built. We immediately, as soon as things were going south, we moved everybody to virtual, right? So we shuttered the office just like Excella and Jeff did. We stopped all training, and we were sending frantic emails to both you know, requests to both Howard Sublett and Melissa Boggs at the Scrum Alliance, and to Dean and others at the same, you know, at the Scaled Agile. And what we realized that whether they were going to go virtual or not, we had shut down all training, right? So for us, it was a people first attitude that we went in. And I think if all of us treat it that way, then we're really staying true to the values of Agile, right? So Agile is about people. We don't necessarily have to be co-located. We can still care. We can still empathize with our people. Now, specifically when it comes to coaching and training and any one of these things, these services or offerings that we had done, you know, before in person or delivered in person classes, whether we're measuring the NPS or not, we're seeing some interesting things. What we're seeing is that there are the learning outcomes, and then there's the social aspect of training or consulting or in-person coaching. And clearly, when it comes to virtual, there is no social, right? So we can't. The 5 of us or 6 of us are here. We're talking. We have Colleen helping us admirably in the background, but we're not in person. There's no human. You know, the human connection is limited and sort of truncated by the medium over which we're communicating. So that's lost. So that one, we just have to figure out what to do about, right? So whether it's do exercise together, have a virtual drink together, or whatever it is, that's one thing. But then what we're finding is very interesting, and maybe this is what Dean is seeing as well. The training outcomes are at least as good or better. And that's a little something that's very surprising. Maybe it's because people don't have a commute, maybe because they're sitting at home without much to do, no distractions when with other people at the table. But learning outcomes from training and consulting are at least as good, or if not better. Now, what have we done? I think the similar things that most folks have done. Everybody seems to have coalesced around a standard for Zoom communication, right? Everybody is using some form of mural or some sort of tool, collaboration tools like that. We're experimenting, trying things out to make the training interactive and such. But what is surprising is that the learning outcomes are turning out to be as good or better as the in-person training.
So that's really interesting. So it actually segues quite nicely. Dominica, you are the expert in like flow, expert in how do we get work across the board. And a lot of us at home, we're doing really good. We got the Brady Bunch screen going all day long. We're doing good. But then I've got my daughter running in and she's tapping me on the leg. I'm trying to cook lunch. My wife's in the other room trying to work, and I'm trying to get work across the board. My physical board was locked out. I couldn't get back to it. So how do we create flow in a system like this? How do we actually create flow in a life like this?
I was all prepared for another question to talk about Tasktop, but I can totally jump into flow right now. So, working with some customers who had just set up their physical board because they're just starting to make their work visible. And one group had just transitioned from their electronic tool or from their physical board to an electronic tool the day before they got the order to work remote. And the other team had just gotten their physical board up, and it hasn't been integrated yet in a tool. But now's the time, if you haven't moved your work off the physical boards yet, you're sort of forced to do that now to make that work visible. And so some of the most important things are, impacted here just kind of like they were before, and that's the necessity of establishing a few solid policies, right? Like, how do people know what the highest priority is? How do people know where to go find information? And so being really clear on where, because you can't really just ask somebody now unless you're interrupting them on Slack. For parents working at home, here's what I'm seeing. I love my company a lot, and our CEO, Mick Kirsten, has encouraged people to, if your kid's in the room, show your kids on the Zoom. It's cool. You got a dog barking, point the camera at the dog, to bring a sense of social connectedness that you were talking about, Sanjay, that's missing. It seems like it's even more so where at Tasktop now, with all of our Zooms and our interactions, that we actually get to talk and see to each other more than before. Before, we'd only, at the home office or at a conference or at a customer site, but I'm seeing people online more on a daily, every day. To Dean's point, we thought that everybody working remote would sort of, you don't have to travel, this and that, but it's only increased. Like when you said 100%, Jeff, I thought you were talking about we're 100% busier, and that's what it feels like for us now. But back to the parents. So we're starting to see a lot of kids bond going on now, because the kids, they're doing their homework, their school online and remote, and parents are more engaged. And so parents are creating Kanbans for their children. So they got all their schoolwork, and they've got their homework, and they've got, their chores, and it's helping to sort of reduce the pressure on the kids, which in turn reduces the pressure on the parents. I never was one to believe that you had a work life and a home life. I mean, not for working parents. It's always been sort of, my calendar has everything on it, and that's how most of the parents' calendars are at work. But as far as improving flow goes in these challenging times, I think the same fundamentals apply, right? Make your work visible so that you can start to see where work is sitting in an idle state versus an active state, and work to optimize at the whole value stream level, and bring those folks in that are upstream and downstream from your product value stream, so that you can begin to have those discussions. And in some cases, it's almost easier to do if everybody is on the Zoom. Before you'd have like half the people would be in a conference room and then you'd have a few people on a Zoom, and maybe you'd have another Zoom that had 2 or 3 people in a conference room. And it was a challenge. You couldn't always hear people right. I think it's essential, vital for audio and visual audio, and get a good webcam and a good voice system so that people can hear you well and that they can see you. I think there should be mandatory cameras on. I mean, unless some rare exceptions.
We were talking earlier about the worse webcam you have, the better, so they can't see all the blemishes. Like, nobody wants to see this. So that's about adapting, right? So we're all doing the Brady Bunch every day. A lot of us have done that. Like, we've been remote consultants. We lead businesses that are global, whatever. We've got people that we talk to all around the world. What do you think is this part about adapting to this? Because, like I said, Freddie flipped it on. It worked. It's actually pretty good. We've got our own challenges with technology. We didn't have anything like Mural set up. So I would leave this as an open question to the room, and which one of you want to talk about it first. But what's the most challenging thing you've faced in this turnover, whether it's technology, people, or anything else? And then I would also like to ask anyone on the line, if you could queue up your questions in the chat. We'll be answering those in about 7 minutes or so.
Well, I know one challenge is I know a lot of folks who already had training set up, and they already had the hotel booked and the venue set up, and now they have to cancel that, but the hotel's not giving them their down payment yet because the hotel's still open. It's this catch-up game. And so I feel one of the real challenges is for the conference organizers and some of the instructors that had already had sessions in play, having to reimburse enormous amounts of money, and still perhaps having to pay venues who aren't willing to acknowledge that what the situation is.
Yes, Rep. So my wife works for one of those conference organizer companies, and they're definitely looking forward. They're trying to figure out their specs and everything else, but it is a difficult time in that space.
Well, one of the challenges that I've had personally with this, and it's ironic when I think about it. I had a pretty long commute into the office every day, and I was thinking at the beginning of this, I'm going to get all this time back from that commute. And then all of that extra space that's going to get freed up in my schedule, I'll be able to think or write or plan or do whatever. All those big tasks I wanted to accomplish that I'd never had time for. And the thing is, it's been exactly the opposite of that. The intensity level of work has just gone through the roof. And I find myself running between, like, quite literally running up and down stairs between meetings to go grab a cup of coffee or a drink of water or go to the bathroom or get a snack that I can scarf down before the next thing. And all of the boundaries have been blurred between, Dominica was saying it was, from her perspective, it's just the way that parents and humans should probably be wired anyway. But at least I had that kind of buffer time from the time I got in the car in the morning to the time I got to the office to kind of prepare myself for the workday. And then when I got in the car to come home, I'm starting to decompress and process the day and now kind of reattach into home life. And that's all gone now. And I'm still struggling to navigate that a little bit.
Yeah. So the other day I was literally angry at lunch for no reason. And my wife goes, "Why are you angry?" I'm like, "Because there's no quick charge." And all my Freddie folks will know what that means. I could order a sandwich, go downstairs, pick it up, be back at my desk in 5 minutes. Now I have to actually go to the fridge, make a sandwich, then eat the sandwich, and I have to think about it. I have to think about what sandwich I want. So I was angry for no reason.
Yeah.
Adjusting to those little things is hard.
Mm-hmm.
So Mike, you've actually got a very nice office. You do that up and down home space a lot. You're actually remote quite a bit. I know you're on the road quite a bit too.
Either on the road or remote. Yeah. Well, we don't have physical offices, so we've been doing the remote thing for a long time.
Only you had a guitar.
I have enough of space in my home office to put up a lot of guitars.
So how have you dealt with it? I mean, you've had that sort of, you've got your home space and your office space, and it's kind of in the same space, and you have to deal with that. Like, how do you deal with that?
Well, so the interesting thing is, so for me personally, the whole interleaving of work and home is I think it was maybe it was Dominica or somebody said something like they just don't distinguish between the two, right? And so for me, those things have been blended for a long time. So this space that you guys see here is above my garage. It's totally separate from the house. I can play those guitars really loud, and my wife in her bedroom across the way won't come and yell at me, right? So having separate space is like a big deal. Having the facilities to do it is a big deal. One of the things that Dean and I were talking about that we think is so challenging for a lot of the general population is they've been forced into working from home, but they don't really have the space and the facilities and things like that. So, you know, I've been doing this for 10 years, so longer than that, actually, if you consider the version 1 time. And so this stuff has just evolved, and I've learned what kind of space I need. So I have it super highly optimized. I'm going to take a slight twist on your question because I think it's the most important thing is like, you know, it's like Scrum, if you think about what those guys invented, is basically a sampling rate on which you can be wrong kind of a thing, right? So we know we don't want to be wrong a month at a time, so we'll be wrong 2 weeks at a time. And we always have the opportunity to course correct as we go, right? And so in order to course correct you, you have to have information. And I think it's Sutherland who talks about making decisions within the decision cycle of your enemy, something like that. And the challenge that we have right now, regardless of technology or space or whatever, is that we can't get information fast enough to make decisions within the rate of change of our market, right? And so I think the big challenge for us at home as business leaders, and maybe even parents working remotely or as consultancies or companies or whatever, is in the absence of physical presence, how do we keep the information turning so that we can continue to adapt to our markets because they're changing faster, right? And so it's like, to me, the things like I would want to talk about exploring is, can we keep Zoom up all the time? Like, what are the implications to society if it's not just a scheduled meeting?
Only if you can eat on the Zoom.
What is that?
Only if you can eat on the Zoom. That's
Well,
a very
yeah,
important
to have, like,
policy to put in place. Like, when can you eat?
Yeah, for sure, right? So again, right, the flow of information, you know, is one of the earliest formative things for me in the Agile community was it's about the flow of information. And one of the things those early Agile projects did is they put everybody in the room so that information could flow. And so to me, the challenge is like, so, you know, we're doing all the same things you guys are doing, right? Heavily use Slack, heavily use Zoom. Miro's a new thing. That's actually a new thing to us, at least, right? That's pretty cool. You know, all the online boards, but then the amount of information becomes overwhelming, right? What do you go look at? So I don't know that we have any answers. We have a lot of things we're experimenting. I think we clearly understand the problem, but amping up the flow of information, I think, is a big deal. Dean, I'd love your take on it if you don't mind jumping in.
Sure. Well, I think there's one kind of unique thing about this particular crisis, which is when it comes from working from home and affecting business models, it grounded out really fast. So this could have been a 6-month rolling wave of, yeah, some people are home and some people aren't. So we're going to stabilize at some level, at least in our business. We're going to know how much business is still there with remote training, recurring revenue, all the things that help us out. So we'll know within, you know, a few weeks what the current trend line is. And, you know, the meta concern has to be that we pay people with the revenue that comes in the door. Yeah. And if you don't know where that revenue is, then you have to make sure you've got the resiliency to be able to continue to pay your people and keep your teams together, because we've recruited hard and hired the best people we can. We want to keep them all on board and come out stronger. So I do believe that for those of us that have some kind of stable business model, we'll all know in 30 or 45 days about where that grounds out at. Now, if you're an events company or your AMC theaters, that might ground out as how much do I have to borrow to survive until people come back into the movie. I think most of us have good residual business that we'll be able to do, you know, remote consulting, remote training, different forms of engagement or revenue models that make us perhaps amongst the fortunate. So we'll know in our business within another 20 or 30 days where the baseline is, and we can adapt to that. If that was a longer, lingering death by 1,000 cuts, then you get in the mode where you don't really know how to plan, because every week or two it's different. And it seemed that way mid-February, but it's mid-March and the gig is up. People are home. They're not traveling, right? So if whatever your business is, you just, with that assumption, You say, okay, how do we get longevity out of that? And how do we serve our customers? What revenue opportunities do we have? What revenues could be stable? What can we not count on? What are our variable expenses? I mean, we're looking at certainly events as well and the things that we can control. So I would say the hardest problem is just not knowing or being able to predict where this bottoms out from a revenue perspective, because when you know that, you have a plan. But if you don't know that, then you have really odd contingency plans. What if it goes to zero? Well, what if it stays stable? Well, you don't know how to behave at that point. So we've seen our trends lines. We're basically kind of 2 weeks into people are home now, and we're seeing what's happening to registrations, et cetera, and starting to adjust to that. One interesting thing back to Sanjeev's comment, he talked about learning outcomes. A lot of people that take our classes take the exams. We've seen no difference in exam outcomes either. So from the standpoint of net promoter score or the standpoint of the ability to master the material, we haven't seen any change. Are those social networks forming for teams and arts and PI planning? No. What's the long-term impact of that? I don't know, but it's, it can't be good. That notion of osmosis is real. I work from home a fair amount. I walked into the other day, I walked by a meeting where we had this, mildly contentious issue. We were all in the room, and 25 minutes later, I walked out and everybody knew we had the answer. I don't think you can get that same experience with remote work. You collaborate differently, decision-making is slower, and it does not compete, in my view. So I think we're gonna miss that. And I think we'll all just look forward to a time where the world returns to some sense of normalcy, with certainly more remote travel. Some people decide that commuting isn't fun and working from home is great. But for me, I just want to get to the bottom so that we can plan more effectively.
And Dean, so that's one thing. I was looking out over my balcony the other day, and there's nobody in sight, no cars, nothing. And I go, how quickly did we get there? We literally went from a bustling city around us with people that are interacting and say co-location is so important to everybody just lock it in place. It's very fascinating. And I think back, so in 2001, we didn't have this. We didn't have this way to communicate. Do you think this is the future?
Speaking to me, I think the future is complex and hard to predict, but I'll bet it's hybrid. So for example, we're involved in a number of large engagements and large rollouts where frankly, face-to-face training doesn't scale. So we can argue all we want about the benefits of having the team together, the art together, or PI planning, and everyone, that's not gonna work here. We got 7,000 people in 5 countries. So what do you got for us? So we've been doing live training, remote training experimentally for close to 2 years. And with kind of this steady rollout, now we're going to test this here. That gig is up. So we're going to know right away what's going to be remote and what isn't. And I think you'll come back to a medium, which is, wow, people are not necessarily going to just necessarily jump on the plane. And by the way, certain types of trainings have different experiences. If you're teaching a team Agile development, oh my goodness, what are you going to do if they're not shoulder to shoulder? But if you're teaching role specialties or any kind of technical practices that can be learned online or with an IDE, that's entirely different. So the world is lumpy, and I think that everybody has to adjust to a new normal. I think that new normal is going to have people, we're social beasts, we're tribes, right? We will reconvene, but I think we'll have learned how to communicate more effectively without being together, and we'll probably optimize a little differently for global development.
So Sanjeev, I know, once again, that's something you're working on really heavily. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're thinking about with your virtual training classes that you're customizing right now?
Right, and actually I want to pick up a little bit on what Dean was saying and what is being said earlier, and a little bit about the biggest challenge. I think the biggest challenge for any one of us in this weird time of chaos is to develop personal agility or personal leadership agility, right? And this is not just if you're the head of the company or the boss over here with folks sort of reporting to you, and you have a sort of work family to take care of. I think it's for everybody in this world, everybody on an Agile team, everybody in the company, everybody on this call, and each one of us. And the test for each one of us is how resilient are we individually? How resilient are we personally? What is going to come out of this, I think, as we sort of work our way in fits and starts across the fitness landscape towards that new normal, is can we adapt to this individually? Can we adapt to this as leaders? Can we adapt to this as team members? Can we adapt to this as organizations? And, the challenges that I'm facing, for example, I have 2 kids, they are distance learning. So there's that blur which didn't exist, before, but the home and work lines have been blurred. We got 2 kids doing classes. My wife has some work calls with Zoom all around the world. I'm doing these classes and stuff and consulting and all that. And we're all doing it within the confines of our home, right? So we're blessed enough to have the space to do that. We're blessed enough to have a family, but there's massive disruption going on out in the world, right? People are losing their jobs. People are losing their means of livelihood. There's in the U.S., we're talking about 20% potentially unemployment. 1 out of 5 people losing their job, losing their work. So in all of that, I think each one of us has to figure out how we can adapt to that individually and how we can come out better as individuals and more resilient. Now, on a more mundane work in terms of adapting training, I think it comes down to the same thing. How can, if at LitheSpeed, can any one of us or any one of the companies represented here, what can we do as we go through this trial by fire, if you will? What can we do to make not only ourselves better, but make it a better world for our training customers, our consulting customers, the people who are taking our classes today, virtually, and the people who will be taking our classes when the world returns to an in-person, more of an in-person format as well. So I think the biggest challenge for us is, learning that. And it's really a bunch of experiments, figuring out what works, what doesn't work. We're having a retrospective every day, looking at everything that's being done with the training. We're looking at the learning outcomes. We're looking at the means. We're sharing best practices. And we're inspecting and adapting, and we're doing that very, very rapidly.
So I'm going to open up to questions now. Colleen, if there are any questions, and do you mind introducing yourself as the host of the evening? I appreciate you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Colleen Alimo. I am the IT manager at Excella. So the first question is, I'm extremely proud of everyone in the Agile community, which is embracing learn, unlearn, and relearn, and experimenting to make old techniques new with new technology. Cheers. How do we deal with a big question from leadership when we return to work? Why co-located teams now? You did it for the COVID period. So how do we return? Yeah.
I'll give it a shot.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm a one-trick pony here tonight. I keep, saying the same thing. It's the cost of communication, right? So it's like everything in Agile is about grouping people into common spaces, the osmotic communication, the tight partnership with the customer. And the reason why the early people involved in this specified that was because that's when communication is cheap, right? And it's easy and it flows, right? So the more we spread out, the more expensive communication becomes, and the more expensive it is, the less likely we are to do it, and the more likely it is we're going to have misunderstanding. So my answer to that would be is that it's an awesome tool if we need it, but there are costs other than just the technology. There's information fidelity problems, right? There's loss of information. And so we don't want to incur those costs forever. So we can do it while we're in crisis. But when we're not in crisis, we want to return those costs back to something that we want to manage. That's how I'd say it.
Okay, the second question is, how do you recommend executing a PI planning across a now all distributed team world for the time being in a productive and collaborative way?
I bet Dean has an answer.
I think Dean might be able to answer that.
Well, our clients are doing it all over the world as we speak. Our first experience comes up in 3 weeks. This is the first time that we've done it. Like everybody else, we're unleashing every tool that we have, including online collaboration tools, our own collaboration tools. We're building templates and forums to help with that. The market has stepped up. Folks have tools around remote PI planning to be able to visualize the work. We built a forum that basically says everybody can put their stories on the same board. What's really interesting about that particular forum that we built is as we experiment with that, it's like, wow, we can see everybody's stories and really understand the gestalt of this. So there's a few upsides to that. So, I'll be honest, it's a scramble. So our first time is in 3 weeks, and we're basically 2 arts, and that's fairly distributed, and we're just gonna work through it as best we can. What we know, and the rule that we're not going to change, is the people that do the work plan their work. That should be number 13 on the manifesto. So the people that are going to make the commitments, that are going to do the work, that end up in our next PI, are going to plan their work. It might be a little more difficult. We spread ours to 3 days just in case. I don't know that we'll need it, but we spread it to 3 because there's going to be some overhead in that, and we're just going to learn and experience. Now, I think also when you're working off a known way of working, like I don't know how many PIs we're on, but it's a really big number. We can coast a bit because the strategy is relatively clear. This PI is not that different from the last one, other than of course the COVID events. But long term, we need to restore that, that incredible dynamic that happens when 150 people decide, let's build this next, let's go. And that's not, you can't, we're not going to be able to reproduce that with 150 independent, duplex channels. So again, we're going to work off kind of a known way of working, a known backlog, a known strategy, changed by the current affairs. But as soon as possible, we're going to try to get people together again and get that informal communication where all the magic lies. We also often describe PI planning as, say if it's just kind of practical, there's no magic except for PI planning. Well, we're not going to have that same level of magic in 100% distributed work. So I think back to that earlier question that Mike answered, I think people are going to want to come together and get some of that magic back. We want to design things together. I don't want to design at my desktop and send a picture on Slack. I want to be at a whiteboard with 3 people going, oh, that doesn't make any sense. Oh, that's brilliant.
I agree with that.
Here's another PI planning question. How can we make PI planning is effective in a virtual setting? Collaboration, problem solving, demand for capacity.
Kind of the same question. We're going to tool everything we can. I think I don't get into kind of vendor analysis, but 8 or 10 vendors have stood up tall and said, we've got tooling for that piece, or if that's this piece or the other piece. There are people that are specifically tooled for PI planning. We're going to try them all. And we're going to explore how those tools work and how they work together. And 6 or 8 months from now, we're going to be smart at this. And hopefully we won't need all those smarts other than to do a better job of engaging our remote teammates, because at scale, truly face-to-face is fairly unusual. Most people face-to-face, or let's say face-to-face in 2 locations, great. But there's rarely the case that you truly have everybody in the same room. Only a relatively small company or a company in just a few time zones can pull that off.
Okay. No one has a window into the future. However, what is your take on this disruption? Will this new disruption change the fundamental way we operated with coaching? Do you feel small, medium, large scale business will be even more receptive to remote coaching now? Thank you.
I can probably take that one. Absolutely, there's no doubt, right? So whatever we are going through now, whether it persists for 1 month, 2 months, or 3 months, or 6 months, because it's 100%, all the work we're doing is virtual, all our tools are virtual, we're going to refine this. We're going to get better at it. We're going to get better at it individually. We're going to get better at it collectively. And therefore, when we go back, I think not only will others be more receptive to remote coaching, remote training, remote consulting, but we'll be better prepared for it, and we'll have a better case for it. That said, I'm with everybody from Dean to Mike. The best agile magic happens when we're back in person together.
So riffing off of Sanjeev a little bit and Dean from a while back, I see it maybe a little bit differently. I see that there's going to be a lot more of a mix of the in-person and the remote. So something that I guess choose to do is when you get thrown circumstances that are outside of your control, is not to bemoan them, but to figure out what possibilities they might enable. And so to think differently and constructively about those things. And one of the things that I've seen, actually, there's a friend of mine who has a company that does leadership coaching. She's actually built a virtual platform for doing those coaching sessions with a lot of tooling that goes around it. And it's actually made those coaching sessions much more effective because there's a lot more planning and structure associated with them. And it's also enabled that coaching service to be accessible by many more people, because it's solved some of the logistical issues of getting coaches and coachees connected with each other. So that's one of the things that it enables. And also going back to the hybrid part of still valuing the in-person, going on Gimbal walks and observing things in practice, it's hard to pick up that context through a screen. Much more so, you're able to do that when you're actually there in person. You can pick up the context that the team is operating in.
So one thing I'd like to add, I want to build on what the other two guys said. I think it's around it depends kind of a thing. And you know, you've really become a consultant when your first answer is it depends, right? It depends. So the interesting thing here to me is it comes down to, I think it's a yes, but it's like a qualified a yes, but like maybe, right? Kind of a thing. Because coaching, I think you guys would probably agree. It's like, there's like two things. I know when I was on the ground all the time, it's like, so much of it is relationship, right? And relationship might get you a little bit of oomph if there's not the results. But if you can have relationship and results, right, that's an effective partnership between the coach and the organization. And so, again, like we've kind of talked around the communication and things, it's super difficult to take people out to lunch. One of my guys talks about Taco Tuesdays with our sponsor, right? It's like, it's hard to take somebody out for tacos and beer on Tuesday night and have the kind of back of the envelope conversations that you have. So super intentional about relationships. And then I think, and this is going to be unpopular, but I'm going to say it, and you guys can talk to me about it if you want. But it's like, I think we have to have like really super clear stuff that we can measure. That basically says this was effective. So if we can somehow figure out the relationship side of it, and then the measure effectiveness of the coaching side of it, then I think the community would embrace it, and it would be an 80-20, like let's show up on site, let's be away, like whatever, right? We can dynamically do that. But if it's not showing the results the way that we're promising, I think people are going to still want it, but they're going to want to pull it in tighter and control it more. That's my take. What do you guys think?
I don't know why you thought like measuring results would be
Controversial.
controversial.
Measure things, man. I don't know what it is. It's a landmine.
That should be what we do for everything.
It's a landmine. People don't like
as
that.
A customer now, I hate to see results from my.
All Mike talked about was measures.
Yeah. It depends on what you use the measures for. If you use the measures to learn and improve, big thumbs up.
Yeah.
If you're using the measures as a hammer, probably not so much.
We also know that a lot of organizations have been really damaged. They're wounded by how measurement has been.
Right.
So like, even with the best of intentions, I mean, we lead with like, this is how we're going to measure the transformation. This is how we're going to measure the business outcomes, or all these things. Yeah. And sometimes you'll get teams that are so traumatized that they don't want to be measured.
Yeah. I think this is a good segue into the issues that we're seeing around anxiety and psychological safety, and how that enters the picture now, because there's just a level of anxiety and stress has, tripled or quadrupled. And what has this done to the safety of, tell me how you're going to measure me, I'll tell you how I'm going to behave. And if I'm a little bit fearful that I'm not gonna, my performance isn't up to snuff, then I'll find a way to gain those metrics. Now with this additional anxiety, I wonder, just people working so hard, working so many hours and not taking a break. I did see one question about, like if you're at your desk all day, like, how do we get a break? Geez. And so I think we have way too much work in progress, way more than we did before, and that good leadership is going to help their teams understand the necessity for breaks and not to be strapped to your computer all day long, to help reduce some of the overload, some of the WIP, some of the anxiety on the teams, so people can have a greater sense of psychological safety, and which is going to be tragic for those who are actually probably going to be losing their jobs.
Hey, Dominic, I'm not sure if you had this experience, but this is the first time in my life that I've actually put blocks on my public work calendar. Because normally it's like, just go ahead and fill it in. Now it's no, I can't, I actually have to go to lunch. So I've started putting blocks in every third day. It's like I need 60, 45 minutes there or whatever. Also
Yeah.
on the, where we end up, I'm reminded of a team I coached 15 years ago, where it was an agile team, very agile team, kind of XP driven, and everybody commuted to Denver. So their commutes averaged, maybe 45 minutes to an hour. And their VP was very strong on measurement, Mike, and he was a kind of the old school, I'm going to measure productivity and stories completed. Yeah. And they started calculating the cost of the commute, and they said, you know what, we have a huge investment in road time. So they started working from home, and their velocity went up. And this is not, the BS velocity. This is like real delivered value. But then they started missing the social interaction, and they're going, now we're not as efficient as what they were. So they actually instituted their policy, which was 2-week sprints. We work from home for a week and a half, and then we swarm for 3 days at the end of the sprint. Now, my team works in essentially the same way. We're distributed, but every month we get together. Sometimes it's remote, but mostly face-to-face for a couple, 3 days. So that hybrid model where you can kind of work, logically with your headphones on and really do a stream of consciousness of code, but I can only get so far, and then we meet again. So I've experienced that 3 or 4 times, and it's now haunting me, as I know how this works in a hybrid mode. It's not either or, it's both. But the both is measured based upon the cost of commute, the overhead associated with that, cost of travel, et cetera, et cetera.
I put a no screens to our meeting from 8 to 10 p.m. on my calendar every day to remind me to get off the screens at 8 so I can go have some downtime with the family, get to bed at a decent hour, and get a good night's sleep. During these troubling times, it's so critical for people to get their sleep and still find time to, exercise, even when you have a pack of kids at home. So I think that
I literally had to block out every single day at lunch, and it says lunchtime with Evie. And I told my boss, I'm like, listen, I can't schedule meetings during lunch anymore. I'm gonna have to tell people no, because I have to feed my daughter. It's not just about like feeding me anymore. It's about feeding her. So you have to block that personal time. Colleen, do we have any more questions on the line?
We have 14 more questions.
Oh, that's a lot. So we've got 6 minutes till the hour, but I would like to ask if you guys could hang on just to answer a few more. And then, as you start telling me that you're going to drop off, then I guess it ends at that point.
Peace out.
All right. What virtual tools do you recommend for running sprints virtually?
So running sprints, it's an interesting one. So we've been doing a lot of big room planning with Mural lately, and we're like testing that as a company. We found that was the number one tool that hit us. We use Jira. Jira for sprint planning. We use virtual tools like but we use Teams, same sort of aspect. What do the rest of you guys see that teams are using for sprint planning instead of big room planning?
What I think makes that question hard is that most organizations probably have some sort of tool. So are you using the tool? Because all of us are probably familiar with 12 of them, kind of a thing. But then but then it's the same thing. So it's like if I want a virtual board, like I've been using NoteApp for a long time. I think that's a nice, simple one. We're kind of moving as an organization to the Miro thing. Just got my account set up 2 days ago, so I'm kind of new to it. Right. So it depends probably on what you're trying to go for, right? Are you trying to go for like a legit, everybody in the room kind of experience? I've done things with cameras on physical card walls before, right? Just like whole room cameras and things like that. So, it's just all over the place to me.
So would you say it kind of depends on like context of what the team's looking for, and that there's probably a tool for whatever
I tried really hard not to say it depends is the first thing out of my mouth this time, but since you've now baited me into it, John, yeah, sure. It depends a lot on the context of what you're trying to do.
I'll give you this, the simple answer. The one that I immediately came to, which is, in my ideal world, the team selects the tools that work for them. Like, I get it. It depends on what you're, as a company or a team, what are you optimizing for? Are you optimizing for consistency with the tools, or are you optimizing for the delivery of value? And if you're optimizing for the delivery of value, the team ought to be able to pick their tools.
So Jeff, I'm gonna be provocative, man. In a lot of companies you go into, the teams don't get to pick their tools, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, there's a system of record for how you're gonna manage the work. Then the question might become, does the team have latitude to decide whether they want to use cameras or physical board or whatever, right?
Yep.
You know what I mean?
How many of us have moved from 5 different chat tools to Slack?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So we had a situation where that was like cathartic for us because people were on everything. They were on Google Chat, they were on Skype. On Skype, we didn't have control, so people were sending files on Skype that were outside the system. And I remember IT guy said, we need to normalize this. And all the teams are going, but wait, we're an empowered Agile team and we love Google Chat. And it became a centralization decision because it's long lasting, it's persistent, it has economies of scale. So we moved to Slack and nobody even remembers when it was other than that.
Yeah.
ALM tooling tends to have the same kind of effect. In our situation, we use everything because we can't ever standardize on anything and leak the word out. So our teams use various things, but when it gets into kind of common tooling, like you really want to have some, kind of standardized reporting or understand, maybe I want to see somebody's backlog. That's actually really powerful. It's part of visibility. Well, I can't do it if I don't have a license to that tool. So I would say the trend is towards common tooling because it eases the way of working. And we could go back to not having everybody on Slack, but we'd be totally lost.
Yeah, imagine how we'd be if everybody was using their own tool right now and had to somehow work across boundaries, right?
Yeah, and besides the standardization, I think the other factor over there is the adoption, right? So I think one of the things that's actually we're seeing an uptick in is actually usage of the tool and the quality of information going into the tool and coming out of the tool. If you have an option, yeah, and then
unless your tools are integrated.
So you should give us the plug for Tasktop.
Oh, Danica is getting ready to make a pitch. Okay, cool.
So by the way, I agree with everybody that you can have common enterprise centralized tooling that are selected by the team, opted in by the team. I think both of those things are true. And just to highlight one of our favorite unicorns, Netflix, with their whole freedom and responsibility thing, I think that's probably something along the lines of what they would say too.
Our annual
quick answer session with at least a 30-second for at least 4 or 5 questions. What do you think?
Speed round.
Our annual Agile conference, Safe Summits, likely to become a thing of the past.
Oh, that's a good one. So I've seen a lot of conferences canceled. I mean, Sanjeev could definitely speak to that because we had to move something there. So, Dean, Sanjeev, Mike, got a conference coming up. What do you got there?
Call me old school. We're going to be hard pressed to give up on the Safe Summit because this is thousands of people with a common purpose and a common need. I get to invite the people that I want to see give keynotes. That's one of the few privileges I have of rank. Those are going to happen. People will gather. I mean, look at the Scrum gatherings and the strength of that community. There's something about being part of a community. There's something about learning together. So I do not imagine that, 2 years from now, everything's virtual. I imagine that in some regions, we do virtual conferences. I imagine that we'll, kind of distribute out differently when we do our face-to-face and have a broader view. But I don't see those summits going away at all. The community comes together, we learn, we teach each other, we advance the science. I don't think you can advance the science by having, somebody on the screen giving their little talk and 6 questions in the chat window. As much as I like those questions, it's not the same.
Yeah, when we come out of this, not only will those things, the summits and the conferences come back, but we're going to be yearning to see each other. We're going to be yearning to connect with each other.
Well,
So I think
so too.
our conferences are going to be 10x, double down until all runneth over kind of thing.
I agree.
Wait,
Totally
did
agree.
you just cough, Mike?
I
Did you
did.
just cough?
I did. It's also allergy season.
Nobody get near Mike.
He said his wife already has him aloft.
I am socially distanced, so even if I did have it, it wouldn't. Yeah.
No, I think
I hesitate to joke about it because who knows in 14 days, right? So.
No, but I agree with you guys because conferences are one of the ways that I get together with peers. It's the way I meet guys like you. It's an amazing time for us to learn together. How long do you think until that comes back? Do you feel like it's like a year before we get comfortable? 2 years? Like, what do you think?
You really want to open that up, huh, John?
I think
By
it's
Easter,
Easter.
You want to put in a poll?
By Easter, John.
Why you sure?
All right, Colleen, next question.
Okay.
I'm hoping, this is my hope, right? I'm hoping we're probably realistically locked down for 3 more months, I hope, right? And then it takes another 3 more months for the funnel to start filling up. And then maybe by Q4 into 2020, we're back in the game. That would be my best case scenario, I think.
I'm just listening to whatever Dr. Fauci tells me. Like,
Yeah.
I'm good there.
John, I'm telling you, man, you're poking the bear, man.
All right, moving on. Colleen, next question. Thank you.
Will the team's output experience a collective uptick with working remotely experience the same S-curve as forming, storming, and norming and performing?
Ask the first part of that question again. I'm not sure I understood.
Oh. Hang on.
I was hoping
Where's the
someone
answer?
would interpret for me. So.
Will teams experience the same S-curve remotely
Yes.
Yeah.
with that forming, storming, norming, and performing
Yes.
trend?
Jeff.
I don't see why not. I mean, that's just the nature of learning to work together.
It might be slower, I think, because you can't like get in each other's space and working out. I don't mean that in a weird, aggressive way. Just sorry.
Well, I also believe that almost under any circumstance other than this extreme one, it's going to be a hybrid model. People want to be together. I want to meet my team. We're IT guys and scientists, so we don't spend a lot of time drinking beer. We go home, but we want to work together, and we feel better when we work together. At the end of the day, we feel like we accomplished more. We feel like we're part of something bigger. We collaborate well online because that's part of our model too. It doesn't feel the same. We have, in some cases, we have bursts of productivity because somebody could write an article for 2 days. It's just not the same. So I certainly am not lobbying for, a fully distributed world. We're people. People hang out with people. We communicate. We rub shoulders. We give hugs. We're empathetic human beings, and we learn when we're together and being part of. I think that's the quintessential element of Agile. That's what tipped me 20 years ago. Being on an Agile team is different. I want to be that. And I can be effective sitting here at this monitor, but it's not the same.
If Domenica's boss, Mick Kirsten, were here, he might have something to say about the whole project to product transformation here. So one of the assumptions that's baked into that question is that you're forming teams and you're going through the forming, storming, norming, and performing part. Well, how can you flip that around and say, how can we keep teams together and bring the work to them and find the teams that are already performing and can keep getting better, and then you're bringing new problems to them. And that avoids that whole forming, storming, and norming part of that, and you're just living as much as you can in that performing stage.
Yeah, it kind of depends on which side of the Agile team world you're on. I think we get spoiled. I'll bet most of us been on Agile teams for a decade. Not everybody has. We probably teach classes every week or meet people, in our classes that go, well, what's this Agile thing? And when they form an Agile team, they go through exactly that. But over time, you're right. The team is the thing. And one of the things that's interesting for me in thinking about the different way of working now and responding to a crisis, a team is different than somebody in a functional role. My team actually has a member right now with some family health issues. That person's critical. We're totally covering for that. There's no questions asked. And the reason we can cover is that we've worked together as a team and we have T skills. So it doesn't even matter who does the work. But when we were functionally oriented, I wouldn't know how to help this guy. I don't know what his backlog is. I don't know what, I'd be completely clueless. I would have no knowledge. So the resiliency of an Agile team in a time of change or at a time of stress, I think is really extraordinary. I think that's part of the magic that is Agile development, which is, wow, we can really address the challenges. If the work moves, we're good with that. If somebody's out, we're good with that. We know how to work together in the face of fairly dramatic change.
Okay.
Hey guys, I'm sorry. I got a jet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For inviting me.
Domenica.
And
Thanks,
we
Domenica, for letting us off the hook.
thanks. Bye.
we were going to one more question, just one.
Okay. How has the dynamics of your client relationships changed in this new remote world?
So I'm gonna jump on this one, and then I'd love to hear what everybody else has to say. This is what I think. This is the interesting thing, right? So everybody's remote, right? Account leadership's remote, coaches are remote, people coordinating work remote, like everything's remote. And the tyranny of the day impacts the clients we're working with, right? They're dealing with this COVID stuff and their remote workforce, all these different things all at the same time. So they're kind of going through this transformative event over distance while they're dealing with kind of a crisis. And so for me, like, I keep going back to intentionality of communication, but having systematic ways of staying in front of people, maintaining relationships, keeping the communication going, right, all that kind of stuff. So the dynamic, to answer the question, is that I think it's getting pulled apart, and we have to figure out how to pull it together, right? It's going to require more energy to pull it together during this time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very much the same thing. I think some structure, but then we also have to be sensitive to the situation that each one of our clients is going through. They're dealing with their own crises. They're dealing with their own teams. They're dealing with their own issues. So, how do you juxtapose what we need and what we want, and with what they need and what they want, right? And so how can we best help them and align around their schedules? I think that's for an existing relationships. I think there's also the danger and sort of a jeopardy for making those new relationships. You're talking about going to conferences, meeting people, having a beer, going to a bar afterwards, or just going and hanging out and playing pool, whatever it is, right? So making new relationships is going to be significantly more difficult right now, I believe, since we're in this remote world. But for the existing relationship, that faces a challenge as well. There's no doubt.
Our support cases went up like 30 or 40%. I don't know why. I didn't track the numbers. Are people just wanting to know more? Are they wanting, to know about their class? I'm not sure. But boy, I'm glad that we have the capacity to address that, because you do want to keep, you want to communicate more, not less, because it's not free. You're not going to be there next week. So you need to take the time on your calendar to make sure that you're making the contacts and staying in touch.
From my perspective, all of this disruption and change has created a unique opportunity to be able to build relationships. And I get the distance, and it's not the same. But this is something that occurred to me probably late last week, is that being on these Zoom calls or the video calls, and you get the screen, everybody's taking these from home. They're not in the office setting anymore. And so you get this little window into people's homes where they live. And you get to see different aspects that you otherwise wouldn't have known about. And it's a chance to build connection in a completely different way, and a completely different level. So for me, anybody that's on this call is watching this, they can see my Star Wars Legos back here, and there's a lot more of them around my man cave, and Mike's got the guitars, and Colleen's got books, and everybody's got their, John got a picture and drapes back there.
Black from when I worked at the White House, but we don't have to talk about that.
So he's got it. No, Dean has a whiteboard.
I got a whiteboard.
Yeah. So do I. Yep. My whiteboard's right there too. Yeah. But it gives us these unique opportunities now to, again, just connect, not just as colleagues or professionals, but people, like individuals. I find it really, I don't know, great, awesome. I love it.
I feel like that is the best possible way to end, Jeff. That was amazing. It's us connecting as people, and I really appreciate all of you taking time tonight to connect as people with all of the people that connected with us. So there are going to be more questions, and Colleen will send them out. And if you guys want to answer them, we'll send them to everybody that joined. So thank you all so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for pulling us together, John.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John.
Thanks for moderating, Colleen.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Colleen. Peace, guys.
All right.
Good night, and stay safe, everybody.